this latest NSA webinar, where we're going to discuss one of Defra's most recent consultations. This one is on the mandating of the elements of what is the Animal Health and Welfare Pathway, a consultation on proposed legislation to mandate the requirement for an annual health and welfare review and endemic disease programs. We're certainly living in an era at the moment of rampant policy development in the world of farming, food and land management, and it's resulting in a very high number of consultations that are coming through. Some of these are particularly and directly important and relevant to sheep farming, and some have got a more indirect connection with sheep farming, I guess. The NSA, here at the NSA, we respond to pretty much every consultation that comes out, and we do this on behalf of our members. But there are some consultations, such as the recent one on tailing and castration, and the one that we're discussing this evening, where we know that there are a very wide range of views. We, the NSA, will respond to this consultation as an organisation, but we're also keen that individuals respond in their own right where they can. And we know as well that Defra is very keen to gather views from as wide and far as possible. So the purpose of tonight's webinar is to give an in-depth look at the consultation and have a conversation amongst us about some of the questions that are being asked. This consultation covers sheep, cattle and pigs, but tonight we're going to be focused on the proposals very much relating to sheep. The consultation is open until the 18th of May, and by that time it will have been open for 12 weeks. So it's hopefully a reasonable time for people to respond, even though we know that this is a busy time of year for sheep farmers. We've scheduled up to an hour and a half for this evening, but if we feel we've got to the end earlier, I'm not going to prolong things. And if we want to grab a little bit of time back, then we will do. But hopefully we will have, by that time, given the consultation a really good and thorough airing. The format for this evening is that Naomi Bull from Defra will present to us for around about 30 minutes, going through the consultation and some of the questions being asked in relation to the sheep element of the consultation. Naomi is a vet working on animal health and welfare policy within Defra. Once Naomi is given her presentation, she's then going to leave us to discuss the consultation and the questions amongst ourselves, and then you as attendees will be left with myself, Liz Griffiths, who is the co-chair of the Sheep Pathway Group and a sheep farmer in North Devon, and Philippa Page. Philippa is a specialist sheep vet. She's also president of the Sheep Vet Society and a sheep farmer in her own right in Gloucestershire. And between us, we'll discuss some of the key issues that have come out from Naomi's presentation, and then try and address the questions that you raise. I'd ask everyone, if possible, to put their questions in Q&A, and if that doesn't work for you, put them in chat, and we'll try and keep an eye on both the Q&A and the chat. But if you can get them into Q&A, I'd appreciate that as well. Before I pass over to Naomi, just to start, I want to log something in everyone's minds this evening, and I'm sure this is a message that you'll hear multiple times this evening. We are being repeatedly assured by Defra that this is a genuine consultation and that they do want to hear views and opinions, and they will be taking views into account in relation to their response, Defra's response back to the consultation responses. I'm sure we'll come back to that later on, but right now I'd like to welcome Naomi Bull from Defra, and pass over to you, Naomi, to go through your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Phil, and good evening, everybody. Let me just try and pull my slides up, and hopefully then you'll all be able to follow along. Phil, if you could let me know when things become visible your side, that would be great.
Yeah, that's up, and it seems it's full screen. It's perfect. Thanks, Naomi.
Thanks very much. So yes, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation to come along and talk to you this evening about the consultation. As Phil says, we've recently launched the consultation, and it covers mandatory proposals under the Animal Health and Welfare Pathway. I'm Naomi. As Phil said, I'm a vet, but I currently work in a policy role within Defra on animal health and welfare policy. And what I hope to cover with you this evening is initially a little bit of background to the pathway, so how it's evolved over time from its inception to the point we're at today. During that, I'd like to flag the current voluntary funded offer that we've got available under the pathway and highlight that to those of you who aren't already involved in that. If you are, that's brilliant, but great to make that offer a bit more visible for those of you who may not yet be aware of it. I'll then move on into the meat of the presentation. So I'm going to take the time to go through the core elements of the consultation. I'll set out a bit of the structure so you're aware which of the sections are relevant to you. And as I go through, I'll try very hard to highlight the elements where we really, really want your feedback, because we know that there are some key parts of the proposals that will be formed and shaped quite strongly by the views that we receive back through consultation. And then to wrap up, I plan to just go briefly through some next steps. So what will happen when the consultation closes, and what you'll get back as a result of your feedback through that. So I want to leave plenty of time for you as an organisation to have a full discussion on what I'm going to talk through this evening. So without further ado, let me jump through into my first slide. So the Animal Health and Welfare Pathway is a series of policies that have been co-designed over a number of years now by government and industry. And in its current phase, it's providing financial support to farmers in England. It is an England-only policy, and that's with the goal of continually improving health, welfare and productivity of kept livestock. And we're focusing on pigs and poultry, as well as cattle and sheep, through the whole of the pathway. Currently, we've got a funded service available. It does what it says on the tin because it's called the Get Funding to Improve Animal Health and Welfare Service. It's a natty title. But essentially, if you are a cattle, sheep or pig keeper, you can currently access money from government for a series of funded visits from your own vet to come out to your farm and do what we're calling an animal health and welfare review. That's a tailored, bespoke conversation between yourself and your vet, having a look around your farm, figuring out the issues that you'd like to focus on, the areas you'd like to improve, and then receiving bespoke advice from your vet about how you can go about tackling some of the challenges that you face on your own holding. And there's also funding available as part of that service for some follow-up testing to look into priority endemic diseases and conditions on your holdings. I'm going to say a little bit more on the next slide about exactly what that package looks like for sheep keepers. Alongside our funded service, which covers the review and the endemic disease follow-up, there's also funding available under the wider pathway for things like capital grants. So a bit of support to buy equipment for your farms to improve the health and welfare of your animals. And there's plenty of information online on the pathway gov.uk webpage directing you to all of those different services and offers. So if you're not already aware of what's out there, please do take a look. There's plenty available that might be of interest. As I said, I talk a little bit through the existing service that we offer. So it's called the Get Funding to Improve Health and Welfare Service. And as I said, the first part of that service is access to funding to have your animal health and welfare review. That would cover 2 to 3 hours around of vet and farmer time. And the whole point of the review is that it's supposed to not be a tick box exercise. So it genuinely is a very flexible conversation between you and your vet, entirely tailored to your own personal circumstances and the circumstances of your farm. And once you've had your review, you can then achieve further funding for what we call an endemic disease follow-up. If you're a cattle or a pig keeper, that's to tackle 2 sort of specific priority endemic diseases. So BVD for cattle keepers and PRRS if you've got pigs. But for sheep keepers, we recognise that there's a range of endemic health conditions and that each unit is actually quite different, and you might want to focus on quite different things. So actually over here on the right, I've highlighted that there are a range of sheep health packages that you and your vet can agree to focus on, and you can apply for funding to look into one of these particular packages. And so as you sort of follow through the review and the disease follow-up process, you can see down here at the bottom that the goal of this funding, so it's public money, it's taxpayer money, and it's really to support people to start getting into the habit of having a review, seeing your vet on a regular basis for this kind of really in-depth look at your farm, and starting to do some testing and receiving some support to do that testing, with the goal of then securing the benefits of that funded support. So everything that we're achieving through providing the funding, trying to secure that over the long term. And one way that we could do that is by bringing in new legislation. So essentially making it the law that you then need to do these things. And that's why we're consulting now, looking ahead to the mandatory phase of the pathway. That's what that would mean, that transition to the mandatory phase. So I'm going to talk more about the mandatory phase as we move on. But just before we do, I'd just like to highlight that from our initial evaluation of the service that we're offering at the moment, it's looking like it is having a positive impact and it's delivering some of the benefits that we really hoped that it would. So in our initial impact evaluation, most farmers, 95% of the farmers that we surveyed who'd had a review with their vet, felt that they were likely to implement the recommendations the vet had made. So I think what that tells us is that hopefully those conversations that are being had as part of the review are good quality. They're achieving the goal of being tailored and focused to particular farms, and therefore the recommendations that are coming out of the reviews feel relevant to farmers and feel like they're worth implementing because they are genuinely likely to deliver some benefit on the unit. So in that sense, we feel we're starting to build a solid foundation through that funded service, and now is the right time to look ahead to the future of the pathway and to consult and gather your views from across industry as to what the right next steps would be if we proceed with a mandatory phase. So let me move ahead then to the mandatory approach now. We think there are a number of benefits that a mandatory approach could deliver. The first point I've listed there is about embedding the progress that we've made through the funded schemes. I've just touched on that point, but essentially we've spent public money to try and support people to transition. And now actually what we really want to do is try and make that sustainable over the long term. So make sure everybody's engaging in this way that we think is already delivering benefit. There's an element of ensuring that every farm is working together to improve health and welfare. We already know that the vast majority of people and farmers are seeing their vets at least annually. Many will be seeing them much, much more regularly than that. So really, for a lot of people, it may feel like the proposals in the consultation don't seem like a large step forward, but for some, I recognise there'll be absolutely a spectrum of experiences and views on that. So this is really your opportunity to feed in those views. But it would be great to know that every farm is seeing their vet at least once a year to have a proper conversation about health and welfare and look to build in improvements that are tailored and bespoke to your farm and hopefully realise the productivity benefits that would come from that. And then in terms of helping our trading position, that's the last point I wanted to highlight. We've already got a global reputation for extremely high standards of health and welfare, which stands us in very good stead. And everything we do to demonstrate those high standards and go a little bit beyond should hopefully, again, cement that reputation globally. I mentioned that the pathway had been co-designed over a number of years now, and we've certainly learned many lessons from trying to work closely with industry on developing policy. And I've just cherry-picked a few of the things that we've heard loud and clear through the co-design process. So certainly farmers and vets have indicated to us that where we're trying to eradicate diseases, so BVD and PRRS, that will be pretty much impossible to do without legislation. That slightly comes back to my point around ensuring every farm is working together. If you're, for example, a cattle farmer and you're doing your absolute damnedest to make sure that BVD stays off your unit and out of your herd and you've got a disease-free herd, you really want to make sure that everybody else in the vicinity is taking the same steps so that you're then not put at risk potentially by a neighbour down the road who perhaps isn't adhering to the same standards. So we certainly think that there could well be a case for legislation there, and we've heard that loud and clear. The importance of a strong farmer-vet relationship has been core to the pathway since its very inception, and that is still underpinning everything that we're trying to achieve with the proposals under the mandatory phase as well. So that's still at the heart of everything that we're aiming for. And then my final point is about data-driven approaches and some of the benefits that may be unlocked by using the pathway as a bit of an opportunity to gather more data. I'm going to say plenty more on that as I move through the presentation, because I recognise it's an area that you all have a strong interest in. There'll be very strong views on that. It's an area that's key for us to receive feedback on through the consultation process. So I will touch on it a few more times as we go through. So what are we actually consulting on? So apologies in advance, it is a fairly lengthy consultation. However, that's with the caveat that not all sections will be relevant to everybody responding. So at its heart, it's broken down into proposals for a mandatory animal health and welfare review. That's the annual vet visit. And for sheep keepers, we're proposing that should include an element of flock health planning as well. And then there are two sections on each of the disease eradication programmes. So one for bovine viral diarrhoea for cattle keepers, and another for PRRS, porcine reproductive and respiratory syndrome, for those with pigs. There are many key areas where we expect feedback, and it's absolutely, as Phil said, we are keen to stress this is a genuine consultation, and we really are relying on the feedback that we receive from across industry as part of the consultation process to shape the final policy proposals moving forwards. I've talked about the fact that the policies have been co-designed, but it would be unfair of me and completely unreasonable of me to say that that means that everybody in all of those meetings agreed on everything, because that's not the case. There certainly wasn't consensus, and we recognise through co-design that there are many different ways of approaching things. There's no one perfect solution. So things certainly we do expect to change as a result of this process. And two particularly important areas that I wanted to highlight up front so you can keep those in mind are exemption thresholds and data sharing requirements. And these are two areas where there wasn't agreement during the policy design process. So what do I mean by exemption thresholds? Essentially, in order to try to relieve burden on the smallest herds and flocks, in the consultation, we're proposing that for those with herds and flocks below a certain number of animals, they would either be subject to reduced requirements or in some circumstances, potentially no requirements at all. Recognise that's a bit polarising. I think many people could see that absolutely there's a case for not imposing an undue burden on the smallest herds and flocks. But you might also have a sense that actually if I'm being required to take these measures, maybe it would be fair for everybody to be playing their part. So I think there'll be views on both ends of the spectrum there. Please do feed into us on that particularly. I'll touch on exactly what that looks like for the sheep sector in a couple of slides' time and what the exemption thresholds we're proposing are. And then the second piece is data sharing requirements. It's the second time I've mentioned it. But once again, this is an area where in some cases there was great ambition and a sense that really the pathway could be a way that we can really unlock some of the great benefits we could obtain through having better data coverage in some key areas. Also recognise that there's nervousness and caution about the feeling of sharing data with government and potentially the burden that could add. And so we really want to understand, and I'll say a bit more about it later, but what is reasonable and proportionate? Where could there be real benefits, if anywhere? So I'll touch on again exactly what the data sharing requirements that we're proposing would be for the sheep sector as I move through, but just keep that in mind as a key area. I just wanted to go through quickly with you the actual structure of the consultation so that you understand how it's set up and which are the relevant bits to respond to. It's being hosted on Citizen Space, which is our online platform, and that's sort of the digital system where you can click through and see the different sections as they come up and then type in your responses below the sections. So if you go onto the platform, it opens with an overview and introduction. That's a bit of background to the pathway. So essentially what I've covered in my first couple of slides here. Then you need to pop in a bit of information about yourself or your organisation, just so we know who's responding. And then you're into the proposals. So each of these sections gives information about what we're proposing, followed by some questions about the proposals for you to fill in your answers. And the proposals start off with the vet visit, so absolutely relevant for sheepkeepers to fill that bit in because the review includes sheepkeepers, and then moves into the flock health plan, again, directly relevant for sheepkeepers. Following on from that, there are the two sections with the proposals on the eradication programme, so both BVD and PERS. You'll be relieved to hear that if you don't keep cattle or pigs, we're not expecting people at all to fill in bits like that aren't relevant to them. So please do feel free to skip through those if they're not for you. But just to highlight, don't miss out the bits. There are some other bits that come towards the end that will still be relevant. So these are short sections. There's a short section on compliance and enforcement. I'll say a bit more about that as we move through. And another short section on the estimated impact of proposals. So with the move to mandatory, that does mean that the current funding that's available under our voluntary service would end. So the cost responsibility of paying for the vet visit would fall onto farmers under the mandatory proposals, just to make people really aware of that. Therefore, as part of the consultation, we've calculated an estimated cost and benefit analysis. We've tried to work out what we think it would cost farmers to carry out the measures, and we've tried to calculate what we think the benefits that they would receive in turn would be as well. So I'll say a little bit more about that as we move through, but to flag that that's a key and important section to have a look over and please give feedback on. And then finally, at the very, very end of the consultation, there is an open question for general comments. So all of the questions that come under each of these subsections, they've sort of got boxes to say you strongly agree or strongly disagree or where you are on the spectrum in between. And in some cases, there are also free text boxes for you to share a bit more information with us. If there's anything as you go through that you can't find a question that fits what you want to tell us, or actually if what you want to provide is overarching comments on the programme, the proposals as a whole, please do keep in mind that right at the very end, there is a free text box where you can put anything you like in as much detail as you like, and that will come straight through to us as well. So that's the opportunity for anything that we might have missed or not given you the opportunity to feed in on earlier in the proposal section. Please do include that there. I also recognise that not everybody loves the online platform, the Citizen Space platform, and some people do find it tricky to navigate through that. So with that in mind, if you go onto the homepage, the Citizen Space homepage, and scroll down, you'll find that we've also included a Word version and a PDF version of the consultation available as attachments on the homepage. If you would rather, you're very welcome to fill those in within those documents, and then you can either email them to us or even post them to us if you want to. I will say it's a bit easier for us to receive responses through Citizen Space, because then they sort of come directly to us in a format that's all ready for analysis. But we're more than happy to accept responses in any format. And I highlight the sort of Word and PDF options because I know also some people just like to be able to read the whole document rather than sort of clicking to and fro between different screens, or even print off a hard copy and read through it as you're answering. So just be aware that that's already there available as well, in case that's of use to anybody. Okay, let me jump through then into sort of the meat of the contents. I've popped this slide in as a little bit of a comparison between the current voluntary phase and the proposed approach for the mandatory phase. So those of you who are already a bit familiar with the voluntary process as it stands can have a little bit of an understanding of what might change. So in terms of the review, so the annual vet visit, we are proposing that exactly the same flexibility as currently exists would be retained. So everything I've talked about in terms of the conversation being a free conversation between you and your vet, without sort of us expecting a big form to be filled in or information to be captured in a certain way, all of that would apply in exactly the same way to try and make sure, once again, that it's really, really tailored to individual farms and that you're receiving the benefit of an overview of your particular circumstances. But under the mandatory proposals, we are now suggesting that there could be some additional requirements around data sharing. So we're proposing that we could gather data on health and welfare, on disease status, and on medicine and vaccine usage. We think that there are some data-driven benefits that could be realised as a result of gathering that data. The first one is around benchmarking. Now, I appreciate some people really, really like the idea of benchmarking and feel there's genuine value in kind of understanding where you sit on some key indicators. And where we think that could be particularly helpful is potentially feeding back into the review process. So if it provides you with a bit of an evidence base for that conversation that you have between vet and farmer to kind of look at the figures and say, oh, hang on a minute, maybe there's a bit of room for improvement there, or actually this looks like it's going really, really well. Can we capitalize on that in some ways? Also recognise that for some people benchmarking doesn't sit right, and I know that particularly for the sheep sector there will be sector specific differences, but for the sheep sector there's a real diversity of business type, and therefore it may not feel appropriate or sensible to try and measure your own business against other businesses of a similar type if you feel that they're not similar enough to be an accurate reflection. So if you've got feelings one way or another on the benchmarking approach, please do let us know. The second potential benefit of capturing some data is around knowledge-based trading. So this feels particularly important for the disease control and eradication programs. As I've said already, if you're trying to keep your herd free of BVD or PRRS and you're buying in animals, you really want to be sure that they've been tested and they're negative for either of those diseases. But there could be some broader benefits as well in terms of understanding a little bit more about the health status of animals that you're buying. And it's a bit more transparency potentially around that trading, buying, selling process. And then my final point around data is I think it's fair to say that we're often operating in a fairly patchy data landscape. We're often trying to make best guesses about things like national level estimates of disease prevalence, amongst other things. So this potentially offers us a vehicle to be able to gather a slightly more comprehensive data set, to have a better indication of trends, national trends over time, for example, in some key areas. The other things that are new under the mandatory proposals are the flock health planning and the parasite control plan within that. That's what I'm going to cover on my next slide for sheep keepers. This is taking a slightly different approach to the approach for cattle and pig keepers, where we're focusing on trying to eradicate a specific disease. The point of the flock health plan is to enable a more holistic approach for flock management, because we recognise there's a spectrum of things across the sheep sector that people will want to focus on. And the goal of the parasite control plan is around improved understanding of anthelmintic resistance nationally. Now, some early feedback has already come through to us that maybe actually anthelmintic resistance isn't the right way to be thinking about this, and perhaps wormer efficacy is the right sort of terminology and maybe the right sort of framework for it. So again, if you've got views on that, please do let us know in response to the bit around the parasite control plan in the consultation. And the final part that's sort of new under the mandatory proposals is, because we are proposing eradication schemes for BVD and PRRS, there'd be some required testing to be done, and then sharing of those test results and the associated disease status, which feeds back into the knowledge-based trading. It's trying to provide that transparency around buying and selling of animals. All right, so let me dive a bit deeper then into the flock health planning and the parasite control plan. So why take a mandatory approach to flock health planning? We think it provides an opportunity for each farm to drive improvements to overall flock health alongside their vet. It's in a similar vein to the review, in that there's plenty of flexibility around the flock health plan. We're not proposing that it would be really prescriptive. And in exactly the same way as the review, Defra wouldn't be seeking to access the contents of your flock health plan at all, or the contents of your review beyond the bits of data that we're suggesting could be shared. So that remains entirely between you and your vet, and is a document that should help to guide you and be reviewed sort of as you move through the production cycle. The point of the parasite control plan is about tackling production limiting internal and external parasites. And again, I recognise that many on the call will already be doing flock health planning and will already be doing plenty to tackle parasites. So again, it may not feel that new to some, but to others it might feel like quite a step forward and potentially quite an increased burden. So really, really do want to capture views across the sector on how this feels. And I think I've just highlighted this on my previous slide a bit, around talking about data, but there is a chance that if we do capture some data under the parasite control plan, it could provide us some important insights into worm efficacy trends across England, and it could allow farmers to do a bit of benchmarking against similar operations if you feel that would be of value. So what could the scheme look like? In the consultation, we're setting out the detail of what we think should be included, but at its heart, it should be, we think, a discussion on biosecurity, infectious disease priorities, and flock health and performance. But as I said, it's flexible, so any other additional topics could be included on an individual farm basis. I've given a suggested list there, but anything that the farmer and vet feels is relevant to discuss and talk through as part of the plan absolutely could be included. And then we think within the parasite control plan, that could cover things like actions taken and treatments given, and maybe recording any wormer resistance that's present on the holding. To try and make life easier, we've proposed that we would share templates with detailed advice and guidance, but those are entirely optional, so that no obligation to work through those templates and follow that guidance specifically. If you've got a plan already with your vet and you've a way of doing things that you like doing it, then that's absolutely fine. There is genuine flexibility in how that's conducted. So some key considerations that I really wanted to highlight and draw to your attention. The first one, exemption thresholds. I briefly touched on this earlier in the presentation. So at the moment, for the sheep sector, the consultation proposes that if you're a flock with 100 or fewer sheep, there'd be no requirements. So no requirement to have an annual review, your annual vet visit, and no requirement to engage in any flock health planning. Really want to understand from people, does that feel right for both the review and the flock health plan? It may be that people feel quite strongly that the flock health plan is a fairly significant additional thing to take on, and therefore that should be reserved for just the larger flocks, so the bigger commercial units, in which case is 100 the right exemption threshold there? Or actually, if it's flock health planning and that's taking on quite a big additional piece of work, should that be for larger flocks, if at all? So potentially to increase the exemption threshold there. But it might be that people feel actually probably, people should be having a vet out at least once a year to do an annual review to sort of to make sure that you're touching base with your vet at least once a year, and therefore maybe some smaller flocks should be included under the umbrella of the review. And this is an area that we absolutely expect to change as a result of the feedback that you give us. So please do tell us your views on that point. I'm also now going to move on then to compliance and enforcement. So just to be really clear, we say this in the consultation, but we strongly feel that this is not an area that we want to be heavy-handed, and actually the onus is really on us to provide plenty of advice and guidance and really clear communication about what any requirements would be if they came in. So really, we're only thinking in cases of very serious non-compliance where people have, very regularly ignored notifications to have their vet visit if they're supposed to be having one, then we would need to reserve the right to take some action in those cases. There are a range of actions that could be taken. So we talk about imposition of movement restrictions, potentially issuing of penalty notices, or, in absolutely worst case scenarios, potentially prosecution. But I just want to be really clear at this point that there is no expectation that vets will be involved in enforcement in any way. So the goal is not that vets would be policing what the farmers on their books are doing at all. The onus would be on the farmer to let us know, yes, I've had my review and I'm clear for the year. But we really want to understand from you, there's a range of actions. What do you feel might be appropriate? If people aren't complying and haven't complied for a long time in spite of regular notification, what might be appropriate under those circumstances? So again, there's a question on that. Please do feed in. And then my final point on this slide is around the estimated impact of proposals. So as I said earlier on, as we moved into a mandatory phase, the funding for the current voluntary service would cease, so the cost burden would fall upon farmers. And so we've set out an estimated cost benefit analysis, which sets out what we think that cost to farmers would be and the associated benefits that they would receive from undertaking the measures. We really want feedback on this. And there are particular considerations. I've highlighted a couple here, but specifically around the cost of veterinary time. We've put an estimated cost per hour for veterinary time in there. But early indications again from people have been that that's low. It's on the low side now and would need to be increased. If you can please communicate that to us, that's really helpful, because one of our next steps is to go through and do a full impact assessment. So if we can update all our calculations with accurate, up-to-date figures, that's really helpful for us. And the other point to flag under the estimated impact is completely recognise that, depending where you are in the country and what your circumstances are, you might have concerns about veterinary availability. Recognise that that's not comprehensive absolutely everywhere, and access to practices might be a worry. So if that's the case, again, please do feed that back to us, because we can take that into consideration as well and consider potential mitigations for those sorts of circumstances. So great to hear about all of those points, please. Right, I'll move on then to data and talk in a little bit more detail about the exact proposals for this for your sector. So the consultation proposes to gather antibiotic and vaccine use at flock level. Under the health and welfare data, we propose mortality rates for ewes and lamb rearing percentage. And then as part of the parasite control plan, we propose that people could share the treatments they've given, whether pre and post worming checks have been carried out, and records of any wormer resistance. Again, we might be looking at that in the wrong way. It might be that we'd be better off framing that as wormer efficacy or challenges around wormer efficacy, but please do feed into us on that. And just to be really clear, as part of the parasite control plan, we're not mandating that you would need to do pre and post worming checks, or that you would need to share the results of those tests in terms of sort of actual counts or anything, but just whether or not they've been taken place, whether or not you're doing the checks. And we really do need your feedback on the data piece. This is another area where we're certain that things will shift as a result of feedback. We really want to understand what is reasonable and proportionate, what feels achievable to share, and if anything feels achievable to share, what will achieve real benefit, what will give us the most benefit. So it could be that, for example, people would feel there was real benefit to benchmarking on some of these as certain indicators. Or it might be that as a sector, you feel there'd be real benefit to understanding, the percentage of farms that are undertaking pre and post worming checks and sort of monitor that as a trend over time to see if it's increasing. So if there are areas like that where you really think, yes, actually, that particular piece of data could be extremely useful, please do let us know that. And then underpinning all of this, of course, we talk about this in the consultation, but the goal is to try and minimise additional burden on farmers as far as possible. We want to avoid duplication if we possibly can as well. So views on how to make the process of data sharing straightforward for both farmers and vets, if they're sharing any data as well, will be extremely helpful to receive as well. Okay, thank you. Let me move on then to next steps. So I said I would tell you a little bit about what will happen when the consultation closes. So as we've said, the consultation is open now and will be open for 12 weeks, closing on the 18th of May. So there is still plenty of opportunity to share responses, and please do, if you feel motivated to off the back of this call, please do get your responses in. That would be great. Once the consultation closes, there'll be a period of time where we will analyse all of the responses, and then following that, we will publish a government summary of responses. The policy will be finalised on the basis of the feedback that we receive. And then if the proposals go ahead, we'd need to move into a phase of drafting and laying legislation to bring in a new law. And in terms of the time frame for that, the current voluntary funded service that I flagged right back at the start of the presentation, there's funding in place for that service until June 2027. So no mandatory measures, no change in the law would happen any time before June 2027 at the absolute earliest. And we haven't committed to a time frame for bringing in the mandatory proposals in the consultation. And that's quite deliberate because actually we need to go through the process of finalising the policy on the basis of responses. And so depending on the feedback that we receive, that will shape sort of the next few steps in the process. And then, of course, going through drafting and laying legislation to introduce a new law takes a fair bit of time, and we'll need to work alongside other sort of departmental pressures and priorities. So things such as the EU reset and work around the SPS agreement, which is absorbing a lot of departmental resource at the moment. So certainly no change in the law at all before June 2027 at the absolute earliest. And my best guess is slightly later than that. I think I've probably taken my allotted half hour, and I hope I've shared a decent amount of information there to help you to have your follow-on conversation. But just to flag finally that we've got a team shared email mailbox. I've put the address on the screen there. So please do, it's also included in the consultation, I should say. Please do, if you've got any problems responding, any issues with the system, reach out to one of the team and we'll get back to you. And likewise, if you go through the consultation in detail after this and you've got sort of technical questions about any of the elements, then again, please do reach out and one of the team will be happy to get back to you. But Phil, if you like, I'll draw to a close there, shall I, and make sure that I leave you plenty of time.
Yeah, no, that was excellent. You have used your allotted 30 minutes, which is fantastic, actually. That was a really clear and concise and very well detailed presentation. So thanks very much, Naomi. Before you leave us, can we just, we talked about this yesterday, actually, but can we just talk about why we're doing this? I mean, you've gone into the background of the pathway and again, the rationale as to why pathway was developed around better biosecurity, improved productivity, reputation and trade and those sorts of things. But there is this issue that I don't think you've mentioned about the SPS alignment and alignment with the EU animal health law as well. And I guess I won't go into, we're not going to pick up any other questions now, but there is one question that someone's put in the chat now around the vet attestation visit. And I guess that relates a little bit to the EU animal health law and the requirements for that vet attestation visit in the future. If you could deal with that one, then we'll let you go if that's all right. Yeah.
Absolutely, Phil. No problem at all. So yes, if the negotiations proceed and we align with the EU's animal health law, there will be a requirement, as there currently is, to have a vet visit. And actually, so the vet visit that we're proposing under the annual review could be that vet visit essentially. So if you have your annual review, you could then be covered. Obviously, there'd be a situation where at the moment we've got exemption threshold, so some people wouldn't have to have their annual review, but those people would need to organise another vet visit to remain compliant with the EU's animal health law. And the proposals under the review go a little bit beyond the requirements in the animal health law, because we're talking about a visit that encompasses not just a review of health, but a component of discussion around welfare as well. So we're actually going a little bit beyond what the sort of the minimum baseline would be through the review. And that sort of plays into the angle that I sort of mentioned a little bit earlier about cementing our global reputation as a leader in health and welfare. This is a way of meeting our obligation, but actually even going a little bit further than that, and delivering something that we hope will have real enduring benefit. You mentioned, Phil, about improvements to health and welfare, of course, but biosecurity, productivity. We think there are many ways in which taking part in these measures would deliver benefits to farmers. Does that answer the question, Phil?
It does. Yeah, no, that's excellent. Thanks, Naomi. Okay, well, thank you very much. You're going to leave us now. This webinar will be recorded. It is being recorded, and like all of the webinars we do, it will be on our website later. I'm sure you and plenty of others will take a look to see where some of the discussion has led us. But in the meantime, thanks very much, Naomi. Thank you.
Many thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Okay. Philippa, Liz, you're going to put your mics on a moment and we'll start to have a bit of a discussion about some of this. I'll keep an eye on the questions that come through in the chat, but I think if we can have it's just a free-flowing conversation about what we think of pathway to date, I guess, and again where this consultation is going to take us. And maybe that conversation will help people in terms of formulating their thinking and ideas and how they respond to the consultation as well. But why don't we start with pathway to date, I guess. It's been with us since when did it start? 2023,
Yeah.
I think it was launched, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I've only got a small flock myself, and I've used it. I've done 2 full years, and I've done both the health and welfare review and the endemics program. And I'd have to say, for me, it's worked really well. I mean, I've been part of the process, so I've understood the application procedures. I know some people have been caught out with application windows and dates and the periods of time within which you can apply for the endemics program and all that sort of stuff, but it has worked well, and it has resulted in an opportunity for a vet to come out and have a free-flowing conversation that's been funded, so I'm not paying for it, which is fantastic. I know we at the NSA have had a lot of comments and questions and negative comments about the worm treatment check. There's been some questions about that as well, and but again, I've used that and I've found my way around it, and it's worked fine for me. The programs that I've done, I guess, would be metabolic profiling and then lameness as well. And it's been a positive experience for me, I guess. But Liz, from your perspective, I mean, I know you've been through the pathway program too. Just give us your views of the funded element. This has been funded by the government, but how's it worked for you?
So the current funding element, where we have multi-species and multi-flocks or multi-herds, you can gain a lot from it. As in, we have 2 flocks here because we have a North Country mule flock and a Suffolk Cross mule flock. So we've got 2 flocks. I've had 2 vet visits, and we've done a lameness, endemics, and a new nutrition prior to lambing. So and with the uplift now, the uplift in the review for the money, that was, I think, 436 and is now 574, because that was the initial problem. The cost of the fecal egg counting took a lot of the money that was there and available, and so the farmer's time was given. But I think it's been great. So we've had, like I said, multi-species, multi-flocks, and now we will be going into the 2nd year of that, and we'll fecal egg count and do something. We know that wasn't the best thing that could have been done, so but it's worked fine for us. And we've had vets on farms 6 times in the last 12 months.
Thanks, Liz. And Philippa, I know you did. I mean, you're a sheep farmer out of vet, and you're president of the Sheep Vet Society as well.
Yeah. Nope, you've gone on mute.
Yeah, sorry, I just touched my space bar and it zipped onto mute. But yeah, I know you're a sheep farmer in your own right, but you're also a vet, and I know you've done a number of pathway visits as well. So, and both the NSA and the Sheep Vet Society, I guess, have long talked about the benefits to the industry of that closer working relationship between sheep farmers and vets, and vets working in a more advisory capacity, I guess, and less fire brigade treatment, And in a way, this whole pathway took us, the pathway program took us a step towards achieving that. It's always great, isn't it, while it's funded? When the funding's pulled and we start to talk about it being a legislative requirement and the funding obviously being pulled at that point, there are question marks. But how do you think to date, how's it worked for you? How do you see it's worked?
Yeah, no, I think it has played a really good role in a number of ways. So it's helped with some of my clients that I work with, it's helped. It has been a bit of a reward, I suppose. So those farmers already engaged in flock health planning, when this funding became available as part of the pathway, it was excellent. It was almost like we could then subsidise money that farmers were already paying for those vet visits twice, 3 times a year, however many times it was, and it enabled us to look a bit deeper into some of those farms, whereas the money might have not been there, or we might not have thought we could justify the costs, and so we'd use this in that sense. So it's been welcomed on those farms, I think, that are already doing this, and then hopefully many vets, and I would still encourage vets and farmers who haven't engaged in this yet to try and make the most of the remaining funding, or for the time it's still available, to help with this transition. So it's been useful for farmers that were just starting off on that next step to maybe getting some proactive flock health planning. This has been a really good thing for them to supplement that funding, and for the vet then to say, let's use this funding to start that sort of planning, and they've started to see the returns from that. And then there's those farmers that are not really engaged with their vets for whatever reason, and this cost is all, the perceptions of cost and the vet visit, etc., has always been a thing, and it probably always will remain to be a thing. And so this funding can be quite useful to reach those farmers that have never had much involvement with their vet. So it's useful for all levels, wherever you're at. And I think I would encourage those vets and farmers that haven't yet accessed it to start it, to at least start to transition to what, is likely to become mandatory. And if you are, I think if you're engaging with looking at some flock health planning things for the first time, there could be a cost with that. I mean, it's not to say there couldn't be costs later down the line. There is, because we know that sheep farming is dynamic, it's changing, and we've always got movements and disease and so on. But it could be a welcome bit of money to start with, to get onto the routine of doing regular, flock health planning. So I think it's been useful. Yeah, I think for all those different reasons.
And is it worth just reflecting on the fact that, if you can compare the sheep proposals with those for cattle and pigs, there's a real focus on BVD in cattle and PRRS in pigs. And in a way, that's where a lot of the co-creation around this whole thing came about. The cattle sector really wanted to focus on BVD, and the pig sector wanted to focus on PRRS. We within the sheep sector, we got, as you've both said, really, we've got such a wide diversity of different sheep farms and such a wide diversity of issues and challenges and parasites and diseases and problems to tackle. So it was really difficult to say we want to focus on this one thing, and it always came back to this issue that probably the best approach for us was to bring the sheep, the farmer and the vet together, and between the two work out what are the key challenges on that farm, where is it best to focus to improve productivity and welfare and all those sorts of things. And that's why the sheep program is so different to that's being proposed for cattle and pigs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the flexibility of it, and it's not prescriptive, so it gives real option to explore almost anything in terms of from a flock health and welfare point of view. And that was deliberate, wasn't it, by those of us in that group at the very start of this process, because like you said, the variation means that we can't limit to one particular thing, because that won't benefit all, whereas this hopefully will benefit all in some shape or form.
Yeah, indeed.
I think also, well, we've got the funded visits at the moment, and I don't know, even though we're on the pathway group, Phil, how much it's been taken up, how many sheep farmers have used it, but I know that nearly all sheep farmers have now got a VAN number, so they are quite happy to have some level of engagement with their vet. And if you look at the proposals as a vet visit, start with that, which I think we can all agree is a really good thing. And then what happens afterwards with the data collection, how detailed the flock health plan is, what is the parasite plan. Those are the things that we really need to respond on.
Yeah, I think you're right.
That aren't set in stone at the moment, at all. And Naomi was very, very firm with that this is a real consultation, and they want to know. And are there other bits of data that would be better held and better benchmarked?
And the way that Naomi laid that out, you could say what they've laid out, what they proposed is quite a gold standard, and they want to test this thinking and these ideas with people and pick up people's views. And it's likely that what comes out of it won't be what's proposed. There may be one or two additional things that people suggest, but it's probably, knowing a lot of people in this sector a little bit, is probably likely that there'll be a lot of things that people would prefer not to do at a mandatory level. But I think you're also right in that, a high proportion of sheep farmers would be having a vet visit to do the van if they're not farm assured. If they're farm assured, they don't need to, but otherwise the vet will be coming to do that van. And again, I think the veterinary profession has really tightened up over this last, I don't know, 5 years, 10 years possibly, around the need to be out on farm and understand what's going on there to prescribe medicines as well. There was a time when that may have been a bit lax, but I don't think it's lax anymore. Philip, I don't know what you...
No, I agree. And again, this, using funding from this and being able to cover a few bases at once, like the vet attestation, like farm assurance visits, like the pathway, has been welcome, because you're right. To be able to prescribe, we need to visit the farms at least once in 12 months, and that has been a difficult conversation sometimes on some farms that were in a habit of that not happening. Whereas a result of this, it's helped with that, and so yeah, I think this can be used efficiently to cover lots of different things that farmers have to comply with.
Yeah, indeed.
I think you're right. I don't think it will be that you'll get your van number. That's the kind of basic standard. And then if you need something for assurance, then this review should hopefully there will be some joined up thinking for people that will be covered.
Yeah.
What concerns me, and this comes back to vet availability as well, you may be able to do a review, a short review, a couple of hours maybe, not too much cost. But if you start adding on all the parasite plan, this and all the data that's required, however that gets inputted into the system, then the cost of it increases and the availability of the vets because of the time required increases as well.
Yeah, I know. It's a challenge, isn't it? And, one of the reasons why the worm treatment check got put into the animal health and welfare pathway was that if you look at the APHA VIDA or VIDA dashboard, the number of or the reason behind submissions to veterinary investigation centres, PGE is still there at the top of the list. It's worms really that are still killing a lot of our stock. And that was one of the reasons why it got put in there. And so it is important, but again, a lot of this needs to be bespoke, and perhaps that takes us into having a chat about, what's being proposed in the actual consultation. Really, it sounds like between us, we would all agree that to get a vet out onto the farm and have that conversation with the farmer about some of their, the priority challenges for them as a starter, that's a good thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then it takes you on to the flock health plan, doesn't it? To what extent, what do we mean by a flock health plan? Philip, I know you do a lot of this work with your farmers, and Naomi was talking there about some of that key data around recording new deaths. As there could be anything. There's a bigger waste, could there, than ewes dying on the farm?
No.
But recording new deaths and lambing percentages, she said. But again, that's going to differ depending very much on the farm in question, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is where the replies and the responses in the consultation are really important, because I have the same concerns probably along with both of you and others and farmers and vets on the call around the data and how it's going to be used and why they need it. And I know that I've said this before, but the data, in my opinion, is only useful at that farm level between the vet and the farmer, and the changes on the farm, the changes in the system. It is useful to compare, but it's quite difficult to find systems that are like for like now, from a benchmarking point of view. And not that they don't, and not that that isn't useful. It is, but I think starting off on this program, it's the farm's changes and the data that you can recover and monitor from that's important. I do have the concerns of how they might use certain, how it's comparable, particularly around the wormer treatment and the pre and post treatment things that, the anthelmintic resistance or wormer efficacy. There's such variation in that, how they could standardize it and use it, how it could be valid. So I think those that are involved with that, as well as others, should respond in this consultation in that way to make those opinions known.
Yeah, indeed. Again, for years we. Oh, go on, Liz. Carry on.
The parasite plan, as put in the consultation, it's in our medicine books. Why don't they know we've got medicine books? Why do I need to duplicate that information? The only thing that was different was, have you checked it? Done the wormer check. And we can't duplicate. We don't have the time. None of us have the time to have to duplicate things.
Yeah.
And it's how you analyze that. What's the use? How useful is it to know how much, for example, is being used? Because it's not how much is being used. Is it being used correctly to the right animals for the right thing, at the right time? And there'll be times, for example, last year before, where we've had Haemonchus outbreaks, where wormer usage will have gone up on some farms, quite rightly, because we're trying to manage disease. And it's how would that be interpreted on a wider level?
It would be difficult, wouldn't it?
It would be really difficult,
Really
so
difficult.
so that requires that requires responses, I think.
Absolutely.
I mean, we talked in the past as well about how it would be great to have a handle on the prevalence of mydevisna, for instance, or OPA across the country as well. But, again, there's still a question about whether that is best gathered through more of a voluntary initiative rather than mandating for those things, which, again, makes it so difficult. And it probably imposes a certain element of cost for farms that with those diseases don't present any risk at all, which again takes you back to the importance of flexibility, doesn't it, for the vet and the farmer to decide what to focus on.
And there is client confidentiality, those diseases between the vet and the farmer, that information is just that, it's protected information. And I find it difficult, to decide who's responsible for passing that information on, because it's not the vet, in my opinion. That's really the farmer choice, whether we want to share that information.
Yeah. Can we just focus for a second on the thorny subject of antibiotics reporting as well? Because again, we've all been working on that for a long time, haven't we, really? And we've got the e-medicines hub, but again, it's very, very poorly populated, and if it is populated at all, is through coordinated group data input or whatever. Is there, do we think there's a need? How do we go about antibiotics? Paula, we've said for years that it's important, but
the needs, I think Defra have given themselves a large job developing methods of collecting this data and then analysing it. And I'm not sure of their time scale on that.
And that's a point that's been brought up by many people. It's it's not very it's not very convincing, I guess, to talk about wanting data when there is there are very few mechanisms for collecting that data. I mean, there is for antibiotics, but when we start talking about other products, until many people say until we know how we're going to collect it, how it's going to be used, how it's going to be analysed, how it's going to be ground truth to give us some reassurance that it makes sense as well. It's a tough one, isn't it, really?
And the trading knowledge for when the information you're going to have when you want to buy cows or whatever you want to buy. I think that's a long way off as well, technology wise.
Yeah. So. And is there, I don't know, I'm asking a question, but is there a danger that, if this is going to be mandated in sometime in late 2027, a lot of these things just won't be ready. There won't be the tools to make use of this data. So you're mandating for something that is of little value, and
that needs to be put in the responses. The answer to all of this is for everybody, as many people as possible, to send in their responses. Not to be negative about the usefulness of having a flock health visit and a review, because I think that is great, and I believe we'll need it for our SPS systems as the EU alignment. But it's the detail and the data that they're requiring and how they're going to use it. That's where the responses need to be.
Yeah. What does that take us on to exemption thresholds as well, and the 101 sheep that are being proposed to be exempt for this, and what we think about that? Philippa,
I can't decide where I sit on this, really. From a flock health and welfare point of view, I think that anybody that keeps sheep should have a vet visit and a
Yeah.
flock health plan. And I know that I've mentioned this before, but in my experience, smaller flocks, and I mean people that are novice sheep keepers with smaller flocks, do have higher levels of welfare issues, certainly at the start of their journey. And I don't think they should be exempt from this process because they're keeping a livestock species. So from a welfare point of view, I think I sit with it shouldn't be just 100 sheep, 100 sheep and above. I think it should be anyone who's got a holding number with live sheep on there as a that they're keeping sheep should be involved in this. That might not sit from a trade point of view, because there'd be arguments that they're not trading and that they may be pets, but I'm thinking welfare now, and I think that.
But you've got to have a tiny number of sheep, and you're not to trade anything.
Yeah.
You don't need many sheep, do you, to trade something? And
yeah.
I mean, like, maybe the answer, Liz, you might want to come in on this, but maybe the answer is that it's really important that all sheep farmers have that vet visit. They're going to need it if they need a van. They're going to need it if they want any prescription medicines. But what is expected of them just needs to be proportionate to the sort of size and scale. Yeah.
Exactly. That's what I would say. And it will be proportionate, I presume, because it's just that there won't be so much time required at a visit for a small flock as there would be for a large flock.
Yeah, so exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, there was a slide that Naomi put up as well about compliance. You made it really clear that vets weren't intended to be the enforcers, and I'm sure vets don't want to be the enforcers of this either, really. I mean, I thought probably what she was proposing was quite reasonable in that, quite how they're going to enforce it, I'm not sure. Maybe it'll happen naturally with people not being able to get vet medicines or not being able to have a van number to be able to trade stock. I don't know really, but there's a lot of work gone on over this last couple of years around penalty notices and warnings. The first approach to a penalty notice process is that you get a warning and no fine, and if you're a repeat offender, you might get a standard fine, as you do if you would a speeding offence or something, or a training course or whatever. I mean, that to me seems reasonable, but I definitely agree that vets, I mean, it just doesn't help that vet farmer relationship, does it, to think that the vet is the policeman? Goodness.
No, obviously it doesn't, and we don't need any barriers to that, because making change and starting those relationships is difficult enough as it is sometimes. So with the with that added layer, that's no, I agree, and that would be something that we would be feeding back on, that we definitely don't want to be involved in the submission of any sort of data relating to that in terms of who's done what, because it puts us in a really difficult position.
Absolutely.
I'm sure. I mean, we to use the pathway at the moment, you put in an application on the RPA system. There would presumably there would be a page on that somewhere where you put in the date of your vet and a number or whatever. And if that didn't recur, then you'd get whatever you get now, a letter from the RPA saying it hasn't been done. It seemed to follow the same kind of compliance and enforcement for other schemes within the RPA.
And again, I don't think we can guarantee this, but we've obviously had livestock information program available for some time. The ambition for that is that it'll help to connect some of these things together, but it's not ready at the moment. It would be great, wouldn't it, to be able to just put your van number on your on your platform or your page or whatever, LIP, and people will be able to see that you've had that visit, but it's not ready yet. And these big government digital programs are always challenging. They're always slower than you might think.
But when the market demanded van numbers for farmers, if you weren't farm assured to export stock, we all went and got them. Everybody got them. So there is when trade and market forces occur, then things happen. We're quite good at following.
I'm keeping an eye on the clock. We got a few more minutes at the moment, but Should we talk a little bit about vet availability? I'm not sure if I want to talk about vet cost with you, Philippa, but
I don't mind. No, I don't mind at all.
Let's start with vet availability, because again, there are some concerns, aren't there, about whether there are enough vets, and certainly enough sheep vet specialist vets to be able to deliver this.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. A really valid point that I want to come out in this consultation, hopefully, from people's responses in terms of their what they feel their availability is to a sheep vet, one that they're confident in and that's competent and that they can have, they're happy to work with. I think that's important that needs to be fed back, and also from practices and vets themselves that fill in this consultation in terms of how they feel they could manage capacity, because we haven't had a true reflection of uptake in from the pathway. We haven't, it's not been,
No.
The uptake hasn't been able to demonstrate how we match that capacity, because it's been low or lower than they expected. So I think we're still a little bit in the dark around that. And so for this to come in, and then all sheep clients to start to require visits, etc. I mean, we've got a good idea because of the farm assurance, because of the vet attestation, but these things will just take more time. So I think that's an important question, and we need to be able to get that information back in the consultation.
When this was first, go on, Liz, go on.
Well, I was only going to say that I think it's important that the vets, them individually and as their practices respond, and don't just rely on the Sheep Veterinary Society. In the same, the societies and the trade bodies will respond, but it's important that the individuals respond as well.
Yeah.
When this was when Pathway was being designed and co-created and all sorts too, certainly when we got as far as the endemics program, there was a lot of talk about a vet-led team and maybe the use of vet techs. And I mean, I know that there's a consultation going through on veterinary practices at the moment, isn't there, really? But again, maybe some vet practices do have really experienced vet techs that could do some of this work, but the intention has always been that vet-farmer relationship, and anything that was going to be part of this program, that it was part of a vet-led team. There could be people that are connected within vet practice. I don't know, really.
Yeah, there's possibly scope for that. Again, it'd be interesting to see how it could work, in what areas that could be utilised. I think that needs some thought around that. But it's an option.
Yeah. And what about cost? I mean, they put a cost in there of £125 an hour for vets. And I mean, most vets that we've spoken to have said that is unreasonable, that's unrealistic. Liz? Oh, up, sorry. I thought you were putting your hand up there, but
it's probably that would probably be at the bottom end of the hourly rate for vets. And most work is charged on an hourly rate. So I think there's a question in the chat, actually, how much will it cost, and is it fair and affordable? So I mean, it's difficult to answer because it depends on the time and the input that goes into that visit. I'm just thinking off the top of my head now, for a 2-hour visit, you're probably looking £300 around that. I'm just obviously just literally pulling these things out of my head from a generalizing. But is it fair? Is it financially sustainable? I think this is where vets, we need to demonstrate an impact for our advice and for the advice that we charge, and we definitely can, because I know, Liz knows, as you start to work together, you really start to you get a return on that investment of paying for that advice. So we can demonstrate that. So hopefully people are in that situation where they can do that, and I think it will pay back. But like I said earlier, for those farmers that are already doing this, it won't almost be a thing, because they're already doing it.
That's the thing, isn't it? So you could say,
so it could be a big thing for those that aren't. Yeah.
But that won't, it shouldn't be an additional cost, because it should be
No.
that they're already doing what is expected of them, or is
Yeah,
what's
absolutely.
required of them. Yeah.
And we've got 18 months, nearly 2 years worth of funded visits available.
Yeah.
If
Yes.
you get your skates on, you can get in 2 lots of funded visits still available to get you into this transition. And I agree, it won't have additional cost unless the details and the data that they require makes it more complicated.
Yeah.
And hopefully it replaces the van, because I don't see why we'll need a van. And some farm assurance schemes may be able to use it as a tick box. Yep, done that, earned recognition.
I think it's a really important point, given what's been going on with the farm assurance review, isn't it? If we can find ways to streamline that process again, there's a cost saving there, isn't it? Really, as that what do we call it? Reverse earned recognition, isn't it? Really, and it makes a lot of sense. There's a question there about would livestock and animal products from abroad that don't mean the same standards be banned from entering the country? Now, goodness, but probably not with the trade deals we've already done with Australia and New Zealand is the answer to that, really. And they were always supposed to be dynamic trade relationships where both countries will work together to, over time, align their standards and their regulations and their requirements. But we're not in a position where we can stop products coming in, where we got trade deals like the Australia and New Zealand deal on the basis of that, really. Again, the Labour Party currently is saying they won't do any more deals like that, and there will be truer equivalents, but we're not in a position to be able to do that, I don't think, at the moment.
But in the sheep industry, we export, so by aligning with the EU, it'll make it easier to export. And for the sheep industry, that's very yes, there'll be New Zealand lamb in the supermarkets now, but it's we do export. The export trade is very important to for our pricing.
It is, and with this SPS realignment, we're going to have to do something if we want to be able to trade with Europe. It's going to be part of the deal that there'll be that realignment of an animal health law level. So, and that does require a vet visit. So we're going to have to do some of this anyway to make that trade with Europe smoother,
regardless of how many sheep we have. And I'm not quite sure where the pet companion sheep changes from the trading sheep in that situation.
Okay. There's no, and there's a comment in the post that in the chat, in the Q&A, that says there are definitely geographical areas where vets have come out of large animal practice, which has caused problems with farmers. And there's definitely some regions around the country that are more blessed and less blessed with vets, and good sheep vets too, which is it is an issue. Okay, look, we've had a very sort of general conversation around the vet visit, around the flock health plan, around data sharing, around the exemption thresholds as well. Is there anything else that particularly we feel is contentious or would help people in responding that we want to talk about? We could talk a lot about a flock health plan, what we mean by a flock health plan, but whether we've got time to do that tonight, I don't know, really. Again, we've said that we want a flock health plan. It needs to be proportionate, doesn't it, and relevant.
It'll cost you £150 an hour if we go into that.
Okay, well, we better draw it to a close now.
Well, I was going to say Phil's flock health plan will be quite different from my flock health plan.
Well, so in the end, to be honest, my what I've had, I won't tell you who my vet is, but what I've had. What I've had in return for my pathway health and welfare review is a short action plan. It's all gone onto one side of paper, and it's an action plan about what we collectively think are the priority areas that I could improve on. And it's thankfully not that long, but it's short, it's concise, and it gives me something as well to look at later on or next year or whatever, and just think, what do we do about this, and what's changed?
Yeah, exactly. And there's loads of different ways that vets and farmers do this. But for me, flock health planning, it's not a sit down 3-hour discussion. It's more of a targeted time where you might visit once or twice at a crucial time, pre-lambing time, usually at least, and maybe another time at weaning or before tupping probably is the other time, where you have those time-specific conversations, and then throughout the year, the contact's being made all the time in via
Absolutely.
phone calls, emails, WhatsApps, you know, and that is
Yeah.
flock health planning. And
Yeah.
it all forms, there's an action point plan, A4 sheet, if you want, in that sense, at each of those time periods for what's the focus. Because otherwise it is too long to sit and talk about the entire, there's never a right time to sit and talk about the entire year to get the best out of it. It's more, you know, it's a staggered approach throughout the year. So
process.
yeah, and many of sheep farmers and vets work in that way. That's exactly how they work. I'm sure, Liz, you work in a similar way. But to start with, those that aren't yet engaged, it may start with quite a long visit to establish what the farm is, what the system is, and then that can be tailored and changed as you go throughout the year.
For the best will in the world, you're focused at whatever you're focused on at that time of the year, aren't you?
Yeah.
We have a vet visit in January. It's all about, you know, lambing, pre-lambing nutrition. It's not about drenching lambs particularly, because that comes in 6 months later, you know. So it's you know, you don't want to talk about lambing in June, July, August, do you?
No, exactly. There's an interesting question that's just been popped in there. Will antibiotic resistance testing be compulsory under the proposed pathway as it is currently? And my reading of the situation is no, it won't be, not in the same way as it currently is, as the Health and Welfare Review. Again, is not. We need to constantly be trying to be clear about this. Is not antibiotic resistance testing anyway. It's wormer treatment. Wormer treatment checks the efficacy of the wormer, and it could be that you know, if you've got a problem, it's not through resistance. It's through, I don't know, underdosing or the wrong route that you're using for the wrong sort of time of year and wrong speciation or whatever it might be. You know, but. My reading is that what is being proposed as being compulsory is a parasite control plan.
It's the plan, and I think Naomi said that within the plan you just have to say you'd done treatment checks. How many had you done during the year? It was, but there wasn't a definitive answer on can that be done in-house at a vet? Does it have to be sent away? Can it be done in-house on farm? So
yeah,
the devil will be in the
that's
detail, won't it?
Yeah, and that's quite a significant change from currently what is required. So that, and I think that's a positive change to remove the need to do that test every year and then feed it into what the parasite plan is for the farm, you know, specifically that farm, and as part of the flock health plan, which might not include that testing if it's been previously done, or it might include more testing. So I think that flexibility is better.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does allow, again, the farmer and the vet to come up with a parasite control plan that suits their needs, rather than, you know, having to conduct a Defra approved process that maybe not relevant for everyone, you know. So yeah. So I think it's a step forward.
You could answer in the consultation that you don't think the parasite, I think you can, the parasite plan should be there. It shouldn't be part of the flock health plan. I understand it's good practice, but it might, to actually give it to Defra, what use can they use with that information, that data? How can they do anything? I don't understand how they.
Again, the flock health plan was you know, Naomi did say that they wouldn't want to see the flock health plan. That was between the farmer and the vet. So, you know, I guess you know, it's that then relates to what data Defra might want to see, isn't it? And Naomi did say, you know, I think you mentioned it, but you know, picking up information on how many people are doing post-drench tests, that in itself could be interesting, I suppose. You know, I mean, I think Pathway generally has actually helped to drive that message forward, that it's not always a great practice to just worm your sheep. It's good practice to check afterwards as to how effective that wormer treatment has been, which is all about the wormer treatment check, isn't it? There's no point in carrying on keeping worming if it's not working.
But it's so nuanced with time of year, what worms you're trying to combat.
Yeah,
you know what withdrawal period your system can cope with, and all. You know, it's very farm specific.
We've got a hand up, actually. I don't know if we can have hands up on this webinar, but we've got a hand up.
Oh,
David Gunter.
you'd have
David,
to
I don't know.
put it in you'd have to put it in the question.
Yeah, I think you
Q&A.
have to. Can you put it in Q&A, please, David? We can't bring people in on the way that this Teams webinar is set up. Please put it in the chat. Philippa, did you just want to comment on that issue around again parasite control plans and how they relate to flock health plans?
Well, I mean they're integrated within a flock health plan because they're part of performance for ewes and lambs and rams. They're all age groups and animals in the flock will be affected by parasites, and so it's part and parcel of a flock health plan.
But again, a flock health plan is certainly a worm, a parasite control plan. We've moved a long way away from the years where it used to dictate in advance what we were going to do. We don't know. That's not a flock health plan now. It's more about the approach that we're going to take to determine what we're going to do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So it's more, it's more about what's happening on that farm and which groups to test and when to look, and what was done last year and what will be done in the next season. Which is, there's no standard plan for a farm there.
Sometimes it has to be reactive as well rather than proactive. You can't set off in January and say this is when I'm going to do this, that, and the other.
Absolutely.
No. Because it's very seasonal. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, comment come in. Vehicles need garages, RPA needs agents, insurance needs brokers, soil needs agronomists, animal health needs vets. Why not expand vets? That's an interesting question. I mean, there is quite a lot of investment going in terms of trying to grow the numbers of vets that we've but it's a slow job, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it's a retention of vets in the profession issue, and it's an attraction of vets into farm work issue. There's two issues, and then it's an attraction of vets into farm work into remote areas issue. So there's quite a few issues involved in that.
And we are moving gradually, I guess, towards a structure where people are using specialist sheep vets that they know work well with them, irrespective of where they are. They may not be the local practice, possibly.
Yeah, there's consultancy roles, definitely, like the message is mentioned on there. Which can be advisory as well. So yeah, there's certainly ways of doing that. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, are there any closing comments that either of you want to make about the consultation? Key, what's your parting shot? Come on, Philippa.
Mine would be that we need all these consultations. We need we need responses. We can't complain after the event. And I would say that this consultation is much easier to consult on than the tailing and castrating one. So I'm more looking forward to filling this one in than I was that one. So if there's one thing to take, it's that it's a lot easier and a lot more straightforward to follow and answer. So please do answer it and get those views across, rather than Defra relying upon us to keep saying them. We need everybody to say it because it'll carry more weight.
Yeah, that's a really good closing shot. I'll come to you in a moment, Liz. But again, if you look at the consultation, it's I don't know what it is, 40, 60 pages, quite big, but there's a huge amount that is not relevant for sheep. It's the front section and a few questions right at the very end, isn't it? So just do what is relevant to you. Liz.
Do the consultation, send in your response. The vet visit is, most of us do it anyway, to get a van, to get prescribed drugs, to get red tractor assured. The question and the responses need to be about the detail and how much information and how much data are we willing to give. That's the responses. The actual mandatory visit is fine. I don't think we can argue with that or anything, but it's the detail.
No,
that's great.
And use the current pathway that we have available at the moment.
That's
for the
another
next. Yeah.
good party comment as well. Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Okay, look, we've dealt with all the questions that have come up, and I think we've dealt with the key question themes that are coming through the consultation as well. So I've not managed to get you many minutes back tonight. We're nearly it's coming up 25 past 8, but we've had a really good session, and I hope that has been a good discussion for people and sort of whetted people's appetite in terms of responding, and given a few pointers in terms of what the responses might be as well. So thank you very much. Well, a huge thank you, Philippa, and a huge thank you to you, Liz, as well for joining us. And thanks everyone for coming in tonight and being part of it as well. And we'll speak again soon.
Yeah.
Good night.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.